They say you don't truly know who your children are until you have something they want, or until you become something they don't have time for. For years, I believed I was the exception to that rule. I thought if I poured enough love, enough savings, and enough of my own life into my son, Perry, the foundation would be solid enough to hold us both up when my own knees started to weaken. I was wrong. It turns out some foundations are built on sand, and you only realize it when the tide starts coming in. It was a humid Sunday afternoon in Ocala, Florida, the kind of day where the air feels like a damp wool blanket. We were sitting on my back porch, the one I'd paid to have screened in so the grandkids wouldn't get bitten by mosquitoes. I had spent the morning over a hot stove, making Perry's favorite pot roast with those little pearl onions he used to love when he was a boy. I noticed the pressure first. It wasn't a sharp pain, not like the movies. It felt like an invisible hand was slowly tightening a grip around my ribs. I tried to take a sip of iced tea, but my hand felt heavy, like it was made of lead. "Perry," I said softly, "I think I need to sit inside. The heat is getting to me." My daughter-in-law, Lauren, didn't even look up from her phone. She was scrolling through photos of kitchen remodels, her manicured thumb clicking rhythmically against the screen. "It's just the humidity, Cassandra," she said, her voice airy and dismissive. "You always get like this when we talk about the summer schedule. You're fine." But I wasn't fine. The room began to tilt. The green of the live oaks in the yard blurred into a messy smudge. I reached out for the edge of the table, my fingers fumbling, and a plate of rolls clattered to the floor. Perry finally looked up, but he didn't move toward me. He looked at the broken plate, then at his watch. "Mom, come on. We have reservations at the club at 6. We talked about this. You can't start a scene now." "Perry," I whispered, the word feeling like it had to climb over a mountain to leave my throat, my chest. "It hurts." The drive to Bayfront Medical Center was the longest 20 minutes of my life, not because of the traffic, but because of the silence in the car. It was a cold, sharp silence. Lauren sat in the passenger seat, sighing every time we hit a red light. Perry gripped the steering wheel, muttering about how the ER wait times on a Sunday were going to be a nightmare. Not once did he ask me how I was breathing. Not once did he reach back to touch my hand. When we finally got to the emergency room, the nurses moved fast. They saw the gray tint to my skin that my own son had managed to ignore. They swept me onto a gurney, hooked me up to monitors, and pulled me behind a thin, blue polyester curtain in cubicle 4. I lay there in that stiff, paper-thin hospital gown, listening to the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor. It was the only thing in the room that seemed concerned about me. A few minutes later, I heard the curtain rings jingle. I thought it was the nurse coming back with an aspirin. Instead, it was Lauren. She didn't come to my side. She walked straight to the foot of the bed where the plastic clipboard was hanging. She snatched my medical chart off the hook. I watched her hold it up to the fluorescent light, squinting at the notes the intake nurse had scribbled. She let out a short, sharp laugh, the kind of laugh you use when you find a typo in a grocery circular. "Look at this, Perry," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet of the ER. "Stable vitals. Her blood pressure isn't even that high. This is what we rushed here for, a spell." Perry stepped inside the curtain, looking uncomfortable, but he didn't take the chart from her. He just stood there, looking at me like I was a problem he couldn't solve. "I told you," Lauren whispered, leaning closer to him but not lowering her voice enough. "She's faking it. It's a bid for attention because she knows we're looking at that cruise for October. She's trying to guilt trip us into staying home. It's theatrical, Perry, it's manipulative." She turned back to the bed, looking at me not as a mother or even a person, but as an obstacle. "Honestly," she said to Perry, "let's just leave her here. The nurses are paid to deal with this. If we stay, we miss the dinner, we miss the connection with the Johnsons, and for what?" To watch her nap, my heart monitor started to speed up. Beep, 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 beep. The sound filled the small space, a mechanical scream for help. "Let's go," Lauren said, tossing the medical chart back onto the end of the bed. It hit my feet with a dull thud. "She's in the best place for a recovery. We'll call her tomorrow." What they didn't know, what they couldn't have guessed, was that I wasn't the only one listening. Just 3 feet away, separated only by a thin piece of fabric, stood a man who had spent 30 years studying the human heart. Dr. Eris Thorne, the head of cardiology, was standing right behind that curtain, finishing a note on the patient in cubicle 5. He heard the laugh, he heard the chart hit my feet. He heard my son's silence as he turned to follow his wife out of the room. What Dr. Thorne did the next morning didn't cost a single penny. It didn't require a prescription or a surgery, but it cost Perry and Lauren everything they had spent years counting on. Before I tell you what that was, I want you to think about the people in your life who hold your chart. Do they see a person, or do they just see a price tag? I laid in that ER bed for 3 hours after Perry and Lauren walked out. The silence they left behind was louder than the beeping monitors. It's funny how, at 68, you can still feel like a child waiting for a parent to come back and say they didn't mean it. But as the fluorescent lights hummed above me, I started doing what I've always done when I'm backed into a corner. I started counting. I was a middle school English teacher in Marion County for 34 years. If you know anything about Florida teacher salaries, you know I didn't get rich. I earned every dime through car rider loops in August humidity and grading essays until my eyes blurred. My husband Ray passed away 12 years ago, leaving me with a modest life insurance policy and a house in Ocala that was paid off. When Perry wanted to go to an out-of-state university, I didn't hesitate. I dipped into the retirement fund. When he and Lauren wanted their first home in a gated community, I provided the down payment. I told myself it was an investment in his happiness. I didn't realize I was actually buying a front row seat to my own disappearance. Lauren grew up in a family that measured people by the zip code on their mail. Once she married Perry, my quiet life became an embarrassment to her. To Lauren, the village's lifestyle, the golf carts, the staged social mixers, the designer sportswear, wasn't just a hobby, it was a religion. And I was the relative who didn't fit the aesthetic. I remember last Thanksgiving. I had spent 3 days preparing a traditional spread. Lauren walked into my kitchen, looked at the mismatched plates I've used since 1990 and sighed. "Cassandra," she said, not even taking off her sunglasses. "We really should have just catered this. It would have been more efficient, and honestly, these carbs aren't great for Perry's cholesterol." She didn't eat a bite. She spent the entire meal texting. Perry spent the meal looking at her, waiting for her cues on when it was acceptable to laugh or when it was time to leave. I watched my son, a man I had raised to be independent, turn into a shadow that only moved when she stepped into the light. That's the thing about sunk cost. In nursing and in life, it's the idea that because you've already invested so much time, money, heart, you feel like you can't walk away, even when the investment is clearly failing. I had invested 29 years into being Perry's safety net. I had excused the missed phone calls. I had ignored the way Lauren rolled her eyes when I talked about my book club. I told myself that's just how they are. But lying in that hospital bed, staring at the beige ceiling tiles, I realized I had been funding my own disrespect. While I was worried about whether I was being too sensitive, they were busy treating my health like a scheduled interruption. Around 9 p.m., the curtain pulled back. I expected a nurse with discharge papers. Instead, it was Dr. Thorne. He wasn't wearing a white coat anymore, just his scrubs, and he looked tired. He didn't look at the monitor first. He looked at me. "Mrs. May," he said, pulling up a rolling stool, "I've reviewed your EKG. Your heart is structurally sound, but your rhythm is erratic." "Do you know what Takotsubo is?" I shook my head. "Some people call it broken heart syndrome," he said plainly. "It's a physical reaction to extreme emotional stress. Your heart is literally changing shape because of the environment it's in." He paused, glancing at the foot of the bed where the chart had been thrown earlier. "I was behind the curtain earlier, Mrs. May. I'm not supposed to comment on family dynamics, but I'm a doctor. My job is to identify what's killing my patients, and right now it isn't your arteries." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I saw your son and his wife. I heard what was said about your performance. I've seen this before. Usually the parent waits until it's too late to change the ending. They stay quiet to keep a peace that doesn't actually exist." He was echoing the exact thought I'd had 1,000 times. Silence isn't peace, it's permission. By staying quiet, I was giving Perry and Lauren permission to treat me like a nuisance. "I'm going to keep you overnight for observation," Dr. Thorne said. "Not because I'm worried you'll have a heart attack in the next hour, but because you need a night where no one is looking at their watch or sighing at your presence." As he stood up to leave, he asked me one question. It was the same question that would eventually lead to the $0 cost that ruined Perry's plans. "Mrs. May, if your best friend told you her children treated her this way, what would you tell her to do?" I didn't have an answer then. I just watched him walk away. But as the beep-beep of the monitor continued, I realized I'd spent 40 years being the teacher. It was finally time for me to become the student. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. I didn't call Perry. I didn't text Lauren to apologize for ruining their dinner. I searched for the number of Arthur Vance. He'd been my lawyer and Ray's best friend for 30 years. If my heart was changing shape, it was time for my life to change shape too. I was done being the cautionary tale in my own family. I was ready to see what happened when the Bank of Mom finally closed its doors. Because as Dr. Thorne hinted, the truth has consequences. And Perry and Lauren were about to find out that the most expensive thing in the world is a mother's silence, once she finally decides to break it. The hospital at 2:00 a.m. is a different world. The frantic energy of the evening shift settles into a heavy, clinical hum. I lay in cubicle 4, staring at the perforated holes in the ceiling tiles, counting them to keep my mind from looping back to the look on Perry's face as he turned away. I've spent my life teaching middle schoolers that words have power, but that night I learned that silence, the kind of silence a son gives his mother while his wife mocks her, is a weapon that leaves no visible bruises. I kept thinking about the medical chart. Lauren had held it up to the light as if it were a coupon she was trying to debunk. She didn't see my medical history. She saw an inconvenience to her social calendar. That laugh she let out, pitying, sharp, and cold, was the same sound my mother's friends used to make when someone wore the wrong fabric to a luncheon. It was a sound that said, "You are beneath us." What they didn't realize was that the blue polyester curtain separating my bed from the next wasn't a soundproof barrier. Dr. Aris Thorne was standing right there. He wasn't just a doctor, he was a witness. He had heard every word about me, faking it for attention. He had felt the vibration of the chart hitting the mattress near my feet. When he finally stepped into my cubicle, he didn't offer a rehearsed smile. He pulled out a rolling stool and sat down, his hands steady on the edge of my bed. It was a grounding presence, the kind I used to provide for my students when they were overwhelmed by things they couldn't control. "Mrs. May," he said, his voice low and firm, "I've been a cardiologist for 30 years. I've seen hearts fail because of age, because of genetics, and because of diet. But yours is struggling because of your environment." He didn't sugarcoat it. He told me that my heart rhythm was erratic because my body was in a constant state of fight or flight, waiting for the next insult or the next dismissive comment from the people who were supposed to be my protectors. "I saw them leave," Dr. Thorne continued. "I saw your son follow his wife out that door without looking back. As a doctor, I can give you beta blockers, I can give you blood thinners. But none of that will fix the damage being done by the people in your house." It was the sunk cost realization. I had spent 40 years investing in Perry. I had paid for the Ivy League degree, the down payment on their house in the gated community, and the car Lauren drove to the ER. I had stayed quiet to keep the peace, but as Dr. Thorne pointed out, there is no peace in a lopsided relationship. I was paying for Lauren's comfort with my own dignity. "What do?" I asked. My voice sounded small, like a child's, and I hated it. "You stop covering for them," Dr. Thorne said. "You stop treating their cruelty like a misunderstanding. I'm going to write a very specific set of discharge instructions tomorrow morning. It won't cost you a dime, but it will require you to stand your ground." He told me to get some sleep, but sleep is impossible when you're finally seeing the truth after decades of squinting. I reached for my phone. I saw a text from Lauren that had come in 20 minutes after they left. "Perry says the club charged us a cancellation fee for the dinner. We'll talk about how to handle that tomorrow. Hope you're enjoying the quiet time." I didn't reply. For 29 years, I would have apologized. I would have offered to Venmo them the $50 for the missed reservation. I would have minimized my own pain to make sure Perry didn't have to hear Lauren complain in the car on the way home. But Dr. Thorne's words were ringing in my ears. Is that a crime? No, wanting to be treated like a human being isn't a crime. I sat up and turned on the small reading light. I pulled out the notebook I keep in my purse for grocery lists and book club notes. I started a new page. At the top, I wrote the cost of truth. I began to list the things I had ignored. The time Lauren told me my house smelled like old people and potpourri. The time Perry forgot my 65th birthday because they were at a resort in Cabo. The way they spoke about my inheritance as if it were a bank account they were already managing. By 4:00 a.m., the list was 3 pages long. It wasn't a list of anger, it was a list of evidence. It was the incident report of a life spent being a cautionary tale, while my son and his wife played the role of the golden children. I realized that Lauren snatched the chart because she thought she owned the narrative. She thought that because I was the mother, the teacher, the nurturer, I would always fold. She believed that her 3-carat lifestyle, funded by my 30 years of labor, gave her the right to judge the rhythm of my heart. When the sun began to peek through the hospital blinds, Dr. Thorne returned. He had a folder in his hand. "Are you ready, Mrs. May?" he asked. "I'm ready," I said. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I felt the same quiet steadiness I used to feel right before a difficult parent-teacher conference. "Good," he said, "because I've already called your son. I told him he needs to be here at 8 o'clock m sharp for a mandatory family medical briefing. He thinks I'm going to tell him how to manage your condition. He has no idea that I'm actually going to tell him how you're going to manage him. What Dr. Thorne did next didn't require a scalpel. It was a simple correction of a significant misinformation. He was going to hold the mirror steady while I finally looked into it. And for Perry and Lauren, the cost of what they were about to see was going to be more than they could ever afford to pay. At 8 o'clock m sharp, the curtain of cubicle 4 snapped open. Perry walked in first, looking like he'd slept in his clothes, though I knew he'd just come from his climate-controlled bedroom. Lauren was 2 steps behind him, clutching a designer coffee cup like a shield. She didn't look at me, she looked at the heart monitor, checking the numbers to see if I was still performing. The doctor said this was mandatory, Mom, Perry said, checking his watch. I had a conference call at 9. Is this going to take long? Before I could answer, Dr. Thorne stepped into the space. He didn't offer a hand to shake. He stood with his clipboard pressed against his chest, his eyes locking onto Perry's. The air in the small cubicle suddenly felt very thin. Mr. May, Dr. Thorne began, his voice dropping into that professional register that commands a room. I'm glad you're here. We need to discuss your mother's environment. Specifically, the toxicity of it. Lauren let out a sharp, defensive breath. Excuse me, toxicity? We've done everything for her. We took her to the ER on a Sunday night. We missed a very important dinner for this. Dr. Thorne didn't blink. He turned his gaze to her. I'm aware of what you missed. I was standing behind that curtain yesterday afternoon when you held up her medical chart and laughed. I heard you tell your husband to just leave her here because she was faking for attention. The silence that followed was seismic. Lauren's face went from pale to a blotchy, indignant red. Perry looked at the floor, his jaw working. It was the same look he had when he was 10 and got caught breaking a neighbor's window, guilty, but mostly sorry he'd been seen. I don't appreciate being eavesdropped on, Lauren snapped, her voice climbing half an octave. And I don't appreciate people gaslighting my patients in my own emergency room, Dr. Thorne countered. You snatched a chart you aren't qualified to read and used it to humiliate a woman who is currently suffering from stress-induced cardiomyopathy. In layman's terms, her heart is physically weakening because of the emotional abuse she is enduring at home. Abuse, Perry finally looked up, his voice cracking. That's a strong word, Doc. We're just stressed, Mom's always. She's always been sensitive. You don't know the whole story. I know the story the heart tells, Perry, I said, speaking for the first time. My voice didn't waver. It was the steady tone I used for 29 years to tell a student they were failing because they refused to do the work. The story is that I've spent 40 years being your safety net, and you've turned into a man who stands by while his wife treats my life like a misunderstanding. Dr. Thorne tapped his pen against his clipboard. Here is the medical reality. Mrs. May cannot return to a home where she is viewed as a theatrical performance. Stress is a literal killer for someone in her condition. As her physician, I am documenting that her current living situation is a health hazard. So what are you saying? Lauren asked, crossing her arms. She's fine to leave, right? The stable vitals you heard me mention. Physically, she can be discharged, Dr. Thorne said. But legally and ethically, I am recommending a supported transition period. I've already contacted a patient advocate. They will be reviewing her finances and her living arrangements to ensure she has a conflict-free recovery environment. Perry stepped forward, reviewing her finances. Why? I handle her taxes. I'm the beneficiary of her estate. This is family business. It stopped being family business when you treated her like a nuisance in a public hospital, Dr. Thorne said. When a patient is medically vulnerable and their primary caregivers are dismissive of their life-threatening symptoms, we involve the professionals. It's part of the protocol for protecting seniors from sunk cost neglect. The term sunk cost hit Perry hard. He knew the business definition, the idea that you keep investing in something that's failing just because you've already spent so much. He didn't realize Dr. Thorne was applying it to me. A mother who had invested 40 years into a son who was no longer providing a return of basic respect. Mom, tell him he's overreacting, Perry pleaded. We'll go home, we'll skip the cruise. We'll make it right. I looked at Dr. Thorne, then back at my son. I saw the fear in his eyes, but it wasn't fear for my health. It was fear of the review. It was fear of the patient advocate looking into the accounts I'd let him manage. Dr. Thorne asked me a question last night, I said, my hands resting quietly on the hospital blanket. He asked what I would tell my best friend to do if her children treated her this way. I realized I'd tell her she doesn't owe any more time to something that's already cost her too much. What does that mean? Lauren asked, her eyes darting between us. It means the support you've been providing is over, I said. And the support I've been providing for your lifestyle is over too. Dr. Thorne isn't just a cardiologist, he's a witness. And today, the witness is signing the report. Dr. Thorne handed me a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a prescription for pills. It was a formal medical recommendation for an independent living evaluation. This cost nothing to write, Dr. Thorne said, looking at Perry. But for you, I suspect the price is going to be very high. As they were ushered out of the cubicle by a nurse, Lauren was already whispering to Perry about lawyers and reputation. But for the first time in decades, the beep, beep, beep of my heart monitor was slow, steady, and calm. The performance was over, but the reality was just beginning. The hospital room felt larger after Perry and Lauren were ushered out. For the first time in 12 years, since Ray's funeral, the air didn't feel crowded by other people's expectations. I sat in the adjustable bed, the thin mattress beneath me feeling more like a throne than a gurney. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the contact for Arthur Vance. Arthur had been our family attorney since the 1980s. He was a man who appreciated a well-drafted contract and a clean paper trail. When I called him, he didn't lead with small talk. He's the kind of man who makes eye contact over the phone if such a thing were possible. Cassandra, he said, his voice a gravelly comfort. I heard you were in Bayfront. How's the heart? It's waking up, Arthur, I said. And I need to see you, not at my house, here, in room 312. I spent the next 2 hours waiting. I didn't spend them crying. I spent them scrolling through my bank app. I'm a retired school teacher, and while my pension is modest, Ray had been meticulous. He had left me the family beach house in Clearwater, a property that had tripled in value since 2004. For the last 5 years, Perry and Lauren had been living there temporarily while they saved for their dream home. They paid me nothing in rent, claiming they were building their future. In reality, I was subsidizing a lifestyle of country club memberships and designer SUVs while I lived in a small, aging ranch in Ocala with a roof that needed shingles. I had been practicing sunk-cost parenting. I kept throwing good money and good years after a relationship that was clearly bankrupt. When Arthur arrived, he was carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than Perry. He sat in the plastic visitor's chair and listened as I told him everything. I told him about the chest pains at the dinner table. I told him about the medical chart in the ER. I told him what Dr. Thorne had heard behind the curtain. He heard every word. Arthur, I whispered. He heard them say I was faking it. He heard them discuss leaving me here so they wouldn't miss a dinner party. Arthur didn't interrupt. He took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he pushed his glasses up his nose. Cassandra, you've spent 30 years building a safety net for that boy. You've treated your estate like a communal fountain. But a will is a living document. It's a reflection of a relationship, not a debt you owe to someone who treats you like an inconvenience. I want to dissolve the safety net, I said. Every bit of it. We spent the next hour going through the paper trail. First, the Clearwater house. It was in my name, held in a revocable trust. I had given Perry power of attorney for my healthcare and finances 3 years ago when I had a bout of pneumonia. It was the family password for trust, the idea that you don't challenge the system. If I sign these papers today, Arthur said, pulling out a thick stack of documents, you are revoking his power. You are removing him as the executor. And more importantly, you are authorizing me to issue a formal notice to vacate the Clearwater property. Do it, I said. There was a knock at the door. It was Dr. Thorne, accompanied by a woman in a gray suit. Mrs. May, this is Sarah Jenkins. She's the patient advocate I mentioned. Sarah didn't look like a bureaucrat. She looked like someone who had seen every trick in the book when it came to family greed. She sat on the edge of the bed and explained the supported transition. Dr. Thorne has documented emotional and financial vulnerability, she explained. This allows us to put a medical freeze on any joint accounts or managed funds for 90 days while we evaluate your long-term care needs. It's a protection for you, Cassandra. It ensures that your resources are used for your recovery, not for someone else's cruise or club fees. I looked at Arthur. He nodded. It's a $0 move, Cassandra. It's just a signature. But for Perry, it's going to feel like the floor dropped out. I signed the papers. My hand was steady. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it for air. I was doing it because I realized that for 29 years, I had been the display case for Perry's success, much like Riley's sister was for her mother. I was the quiet provider who was expected to stay in the background and keep the checks coming. What happens now? I asked. Now, Arthur said, we wait for the fallout. Perry will get a digital notification from the bank within the hour that his access has been restricted. He'll get the notice for the beach house via certified mail tomorrow. Sarah Jenkins patted my hand. You're not being a bad mother, Cassandra. You're being a healthy woman. You're choosing the sky over the price tag. I laid back against the pillows. For the first time, the invisible weight on my chest felt lighter. I had spent 40 years harvesting for a family that didn't want to feed me. Now I was finally taking my share of the crop. I looked at the heart monitor. The rhythm was a perfect, steady line. Dr. Thorne smiled at me, not a professional smile, but a satisfied one. He knew, and I knew, that the most expensive thing Perry and Lauren were about to lose wasn't the house or the money. It was the version of me that stayed silent. And that version was officially gone. The discharge from Bayfront Medical felt like graduating from a life I no longer recognized. Dr. Thorne walked me to the sliding glass doors himself, a gesture of quiet steadiness that reminded me I wasn't just a patient, but a woman who had finally saved herself. I didn't go back to the ranch in Ocala right away. I spent 2 days at a quiet bed and breakfast in Mount Dora, letting the broken heart syndrome settle into a dull, manageable ache. By Sunday, I was ready. I drove back to my house, the one Perry and Lauren treated like a theatrical stage for my supposed performances. I didn't cook a pot roast this time. I didn't spend the morning over a hot stove trying to earn a number that keeps moving. I ordered a simple tray of sandwiches from the local deli and sat at my kitchen table, the one Ray and I had bought when Perry was still in diapers. At 4:00 p.m., the front door opened. Perry and Lauren walked in, their faces tight with the red of a man swallowing something bitter. They didn't bring flowers. They didn't ask how my heart was beating. Perry held a stack of papers in his hand, the digital notifications from Arthur Vance and the bank. "Mom, what is this?" Perry demanded, dropping the papers onto the table. "I went to transfer the HOA fees for the beach house this morning and my access was denied. My power of attorney has been revoked. Arthur Vance won't even take my calls." Lauren stood behind him, her arms crossed over her designer blouse. "We thought you were resting, Cassandra. Instead, you're playing games with our housing. Do you have any idea how much stress this is putting on Perry?" I looked at them. For 29 years, I had laughed off their comments and made excuses for their coldness to keep her comfortable. Not today. I reached into my purse and pulled out the notebook where I'd written the incident report of my own life. "I'm not playing games, Lauren," I said. My voice was clear and firm, the way I used to speak to a classroom that had lost its way. "I'm responding to the reality you created in Cubicle 4. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Lauren sighed, rolling her eyes. "Are we still on that? It was a misunderstanding. We were exhausted." "People say things they don't mean when they're stressed. A misunderstanding is when you forget to pick up milk," I countered, holding up my medical chart to the light, laughing at my pain, and telling my son to just leave me here because I was an inconvenience. That's not a misunderstanding. "That's a verdict," Perry flinched. He looked at the floor, the familiar heat of shame behind his eyes. "Mom, Lauren was just frustrated. We've spent so much time worrying about you. It's a sunk cost for us too, you know. We've put our lives on hold." "You haven't put your lives on hold, Perry," I said, leaning forward. "You've been living in my beach house for 5 years rent-free while I paid the property taxes and the insurance. You've used my inheritance as a payment plan for your own comfort." I opened the notebook and read back their exact words from the ER, the ones Dr. Thorne had heard every single word of behind the curtain. I didn't add insults or threats, just the plain facts. "You called my life a theatrical performance," I read. "You said I was faking it for attention. You ranked your dinner reservations above my heartbeat." Lauren's face went blotchy and furious, the mask of the golden child finally slipping. "So what? You're going to kick us out? You're going to humiliate us in front of the whole town because your feelings were hurt?" "I didn't humiliate you, Lauren," I said. "You humiliated yourselves the moment you decided my worth was measured by how little I bothered you." I stood up. I felt steady, warm, and surprisingly light. "The beach house is being listed for sale on Monday. The proceeds will go into a protected trust for my long-term care that will be managed by professionals, not by people who find my presence too much." Perry looked like he'd been struck. "Mom, you can't do that. That house was supposed to be mine. We already picked out the new flooring." "It was never yours, Perry," I said. "It was a gift you treated like a debt I owed you, and as of this morning, the debt is settled. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life waiting for someone else to say the thing I already knew was true." Lauren grabbed her purse, her knuckles whitened with rage. "Fine, if you want to be alone, be alone. We won't be coming back for Sunday dinners. We won't be checking in. Let's see how your professionals treat you when the money runs out. I'd rather be alone and respected than surrounded by people who measure love in dollars and square footage. I walked them to the door the same way Dr. Thorne had walked me out of the hospital. As they walked to their SUV, I saw Perry stop. He looked back at the house, jaw working, as if he wanted to say something. But Lauren snapped at him to get in, and the silence returned. I closed the door and locked it. It wasn't forgiveness or closure yet, but for the first time in 29 years, the light was getting in. I sat back down at the table and finished my sandwich. My heart was slow, steady, and calm. The performance was over, and the truth was finally home. The silence that followed the slamming of the front door was the first real peace I had felt in decades. It wasn't the performative calm I usually wrapped around family conflict like tissue paper around broken glass. It was the quiet, steady air of a room where the truth had finally been spoken. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the stack of legal papers. Perry and Lauren had spent years treating my life like a payment plan for their own comfort, and they were about to realize that the Bank of Mom was not just closed, it was being liquidated. The $0 cost Dr. Thorne had mentioned wasn't about a hospital bill or a legal fee. It was about the power of a single signature and the refusal to keep paying for someone else's comfort with my own dignity. Monday morning, I met Arthur Vance at his office in downtown Ocala. The air was thick with Florida humidity, but inside, the air conditioning was sharp and clinical. Arthur didn't waste time with insults or threats. He laid out the strategy like a bridge engineer. The Clearwater Beach house is the lever, Cassandra, Arthur said, tapping a pen against his mahogany desk. Perry and Lauren have built their entire social identity around that property. They host the gala planning meetings there. They use it to signal a status they haven't earned. I thought about Lauren's obsession with the village's lifestyle and her 3-carat expectations. She had spent 5 years counting everything, salaries, square footage, and my supposed health performances. Now it was my turn to count. What is the timeline? I asked. The notice to vacate gives them 30 days, Arthur explained. But because you are selling the property to a private equity firm that wants a quick closing, their temporary lifestyle is officially an expired luxury. The cost to you to sign these papers is zero. The cost to them is the loss of the only thing they truly value, their image. I signed the deed transfer. My hand didn't waver. I wasn't doing this out of revenge or dramatics, but because I had learned the lesson of sunk cost. You don't owe more time or money to something that is clearly losing. I had invested 40 years into Perry, and the return was a son who stood by while his wife laughed at my heartbeat. By Wednesday, the fallout reached the country club world Lauren cherished so much. In suburban Florida, news doesn't travel through shouting matches. It moves through absences and unreturned voicemails. I received a frantic call from Perry that afternoon. He didn't sound like the junior partner or the confident provider he pretended to be. He sounded like a man whose comfortable story had been pulled out from under him. "Mom, Lauren is hysterical," Perry stammered. "The realtor showed up at the beach house this morning with a lockbox. They said the house is under contract. Where are we supposed to go? We have the fall gala next month. We're supposed to host the kickoff cocktail hour. You can go wherever your own salary takes you, Perry," I said. My voice was as smooth as silk on marble. I'm an ER nurse, or rather, a retired teacher who knows how to spot an emergency. This is an emergency of your own making. You're doing this because of what happened in the ER? Perry asked, his voice cracking. One mistake and you're destroying our lives. I'm not destroying anything, Perry, I replied. I'm just stopped covering for the destruction you and Lauren already caused. You told me in the hospital that I was faking it for attention. Now you have my full attention. And my attention is focused on my own recovery. The $0 move was seismic. By shifting my assets into a protected medical trust, I wasn't just kicking them out. I was removing the buffer I had provided for 35 years between my son and reality. Perry had lived his entire adult life with the quiet steadiness of my financial support. Without it, he was just a man with a high-interest car note and a wife who only loved him when the sunlight was hitting her jewelry. Later that day, Dr. Thorne called to check on my vitals. I told him I had signed the papers. How does the chest feel, Cassandra? He asked. Like the weight is gone, I said. The invisible hand has let go. That's the best medicine there is, he said. Most people wait until the heart stops before they decide to live. You decided while it was still beating. I realized then that the sunk cost wasn't the money I'd given Perry over the years. It was the 29 years of holding my breath to keep him comfortable. The $0 cost was simply the price of my own freedom. And for Perry and Lauren, who measured everything in carats and commissions, that was a price they were never going to be able to pay. I looked at the photos on my mantle, one of Perry's graduation, one of their wedding. I didn't throw them away, but I did move them from the centerpiece of the room to a side table. I was no longer the display case for their lives. I was the narrator of my own story, and for the first time in 68 years, the ending wasn't up for debate. In the quiet, manicured streets of our Florida suburb, a scandal doesn't arrive with a shout. It arrives with a death by 1,000 quiet omissions. By Thursday, the suburban social system began its work. Lauren had built her entire identity on being the golden child in the display case, the woman who hosted the most elegant luncheons at the Clearwater Beach house. But the Bank of Mom was officially closed, and the community was starting to notice the cracks. The first sign of the verdict came through a group text Lauren accidentally left me on. It was the planning committee for the fall gala. Margaret Bowen, a woman who, much like the original story's Helen Collins, makes eye contact like it's a handshake, had sent a message that felt like a seismic shift. Lauren, we heard the beach house is hitting the market. Given the personal time your family needs right now, perhaps it's best if you take this season off from the committee. In our world, take the season off isn't a suggestion, it's a permanent exit. Lauren had been called out of touch, and in the country club circuit, that is worse than being called cruel. She had lost the room. I was at the grocery store on Friday morning comparing tomatoes when I ran into Linda Marsh, one of Lauren's closest country club friends. Linda was the kind of woman who knew the price of everything and the meaning of nothing. Usually, she would breeze past me with a performance-warm hello. Today, she stopped. Cassandra, she said, her voice stripped of its usual polish. We heard about the ER. We heard what the doctor said about the environment at home. I didn't laugh it off or make excuses. I stood my ground, speaking with the clarity I'd learned in 29 years of teaching. The doctor was very clear, Linda. My heart couldn't handle the scorecard anymore. Linda looked away, her hand trembling slightly as she adjusted her shopping basket. People forgive all sorts of things, Cassandra, but laughing at a mother's heart, that sticks. The fallout wasn't just social, it was strategic. Without the beach house to anchor their status, Perry and Lauren were forced to face each other without the buffer of my money. Perry called me late that night. He didn't sound like the junior partner at a litigation firm anymore. He sounded like the man I saw in the ER, the one who kept his eyes locked on the floor because he didn't have the guts to say it out loud. Mom, Lauren is being swamped by creditors, he whispered. Without your name on the cosign for the new SUV, they're calling the note. Everything is crumbling. I didn't cause this, Perry, I said, my voice gentle but firm. I just stopped covering for the fiction you were living. Silence was my permission, and I've withdrawn it. I realized then that Lauren didn't have a favorite family member. She had a system. Perry was her display case, and I had been the cautionary tale she used to make herself feel superior. Now that the invisible ruler she used to measure our worth was broken, she didn't know how to stand on her own 2 feet. That weekend, my own quiet geography changed. I didn't receive any grand gestures or no excuses, apologies. Instead, I received absences. The empty chairs at the dinner table didn't feel like abandonment. They felt like room to breathe. I stopped by the ranch house in Ocala to pick up some old childhood pictures for my own records. I found a photo from when Perry was 11, holding a fish he caught at the lake. I looked at it for a long time. I realized I had been owing 29 years to a version of him that didn't exist anymore. I was done holding his coat and laughing at jokes that weren't funny. The $0 cost was finally clear. It cost nothing to draw a line and say this is where it stops, but it cost them the comfortable story they had built on my back. I wasn't saving the damsel from the dragon. I was just holding the mirror steady while the world saw them for who they really were. My heart monitor, if I were still wearing it, would have shown a perfect, steady line. The performance was over. The scorecard was burned. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for next time to be different. It was different right now. The supported transition Dr. Thorne recommended wasn't just a medical phase. It was the beginning of a brand new geography. I didn't stay in the house in Ocala where every photo wall reminded me of the 2 photos of my own life compared to the dozens of Perry's. I moved into a boutique senior community in Mount Dora, a place with wide double doors and string lights in the courtyard. It wasn't a ballroom or a country club, but it was genuine. And for the first time in 29 years, the air didn't feel like a payment plan for someone else's comfort. I sat on my new balcony one evening in late October, watching the late sky just before the stars come through. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Perry. There was no grand speech or no excuses apology. It was just a photo of a moving truck outside the Clearwater Beach house and 3 words: "We're officially out." I didn't laugh it off or feel the familiar heat of guilt. I simply typed back, "Okay," and saved the message, a revolution in a single word. I realized then that silence is not peace, silence is permission. For 4 decades, I had given them permission to treat my worth as something they could grade. I had smiled through it and driven home from holiday dinners gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, telling myself next time would be different. But the thing that changed wasn't Perry or Lauren. The thing that changed was me. I stopped accepting a peace I had to buy with my self-respect. Dr. Thorne stopped by for a follow-up visit, not as a physician, but as a teammate. He looked at my stable vitals and smiled. "Your heart isn't just structurally sound anymore, Cassandra," he said. "It's conflict-free." He told me that Takotsubo often heals when the environment shifts, and my environment was finally sturdy. I've started having dinners again, but not the kind where I wait for someone else to say the thing I already knew was true. I eat with women like Helen Collins, women who make eye contact like it's a handshake, and who don't measure love in dollars and square footage. We talk about real stories and real boundaries, and we laugh without it being cruel or pitying. If you are sitting in the dark counting photos on a wall or measuring the distance between who you are and who your family says you should be, please hear me. You don't owe anyone your silence, and you are worth more than any ring or any inheritance. Peace that costs your dignity isn't peace. It's just a sunk cost in a game you were never meant to win. My name is Cassandra May. I am 68 years old, a retired teacher, and a woman who finally saved herself. On my finger, I don't wear a 3-carat diamond that catches light from across the room. I wear a simple gold band that belonged to my mother, a woman who wore it for 41 years without ever once asking what it was worth. The performance is over. The scorecard is closed. And my heart is beating with a rhythm that belongs only to me. True is brand new territory, and I'm finally